All right, I'm going to tell you some true stories today. About 50 years. Sure you don't want to sit down? We got chairs back there. It takes a little while. About 50 years after World War II ended, I went out west to visit my mom. And she was nearing the end of her life. She showed me a brochure from the Women in Military Memorial that they were hoping to build in Arlington Cemetery in Washington, D.C. And it just had one photograph on it, and it was this one of my mom and her sisters in World War II. And I thought, how in the world did they get a copy of this picture? Because we all lived in really remote places, and I said, Mom, where'd they get that? And why did they choose that one over all the ones that they obviously could have used? And she said, well, you know Horty. My Aunt Florence had a weird nickname. My Aunt Florence sent that into Washington, D.C., and on the bottom of it, across the bottom of the picture, she wrote, Dad had no boys. And they really liked it. And there was a story that went with it. And it had to do with my grandfather, before World War I, coming to see his cousins in New York City. They were all Swedes. And he just did not get back on the ship. And when World War I started, he enlisted in the Army Air Corps and served out the war. He loved this country. His eyes would water when they played the Star-Spangled Banner. And when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in late 1941, my grandfather decided to enlist again. Well, by that time, he had a homestead ranch to run. He had grandma and 6 daughters, no sons. And all the hired help was enlisting or being drafted. And so the older girls said that they enlisted to keep him home on the ranch. And to keep him home, and so they wouldn't have to run the ranch alone. Well, he said they enlisted because they loved this country. Well, I was sitting there by my mom's bed, and I said, like you should say to people in your family who served in the military, I said, Mom, tell me about serving during World War II. And she said, well, there's not that much to tell, I don't guess. I mean, we weren't in combat or anything. And then she drifted off to sleep. And I sat there, and after a while, her eyes kind of opened. And she said, well, I saved some letters from my sisters. They probably don't amount to much. I mean, probably we're just coordinating leave or something. But you can read them if you want to. They're in the garage, up on the top shelf, behind your brother's crampons and ice axes. And I went out there, and I found those letters. Oh, I sat by her bed. We're reading them together. Oh my goodness. My Aunt Evelyn was still in high school when the other 3 enlisted, but the second she graduated, she went to training in the Cadet Nurses Corps in Denver. My Aunt Florence enlisted in the U.S. Navy. She was an airplane mechanic and a machinist mate, and in pilot's training. She called my mother dog face because she was in the Army. She called my Aunt Dorothy Jarhead because she was in the Marines. She was a character. And if you're able to come back tomorrow or the next day, you can hear their stories and the rest of my mom's. But today, because it's Education Day, I have a shorter amount of time. And so I'm going to focus on Aunt Dorothy because I think you'd really like her. And just one of Mom's, because she has a story about German boys about your age that I don't think you'll want to miss. But if you come back tomorrow or the next day, you can hear the whole thing. So, Aunt Dorothy, U.S. Marine Corps Staff Sergeant, She was a radar radio mechanic stationed at Cherry Point, North Carolina. That was a long way from a homestead ranch. And in April 1944, she wrote, and I'm quoting her just exactly, April 1944, we have PBJ bombers coming in here by the hundreds after rough treatment. We're also working on the F-4U fighters that fly with them. What a formidable battle team. Huge troop movements are going west from here. And a few weeks later, she wrote, one of the radar fellas came steaming into the shop today, yelling, the radio gear in one of the PBJs is smoking. And Helen and I grabbed our toolboxes and went rushing madly out there, and we got that thing running like a top. And then we called that fella over and showed him. Finally, we got the last laugh on the fellas because they're always telling us to let them get clear off the ship before we blow it up. And then later, she said, yesterday, I went up in an SNJ, a two-seater open cockpit plane. And in the very small print, I can tell you, sister, that I got dangerously close to being sick. But I had the thrill of my life. As the pilot left the field, he said, make sure your safety belt's fastened. Yes, sir. And you tell me when you start to get sick. Yes, sir. But to myself, I said, heck with him. I never get sick. And I've seen plenty of acrobats in a PBJ. He can't make me holler quits. But then, we rolled, and we banked, and we dove, and we climbed, and we went every which way as fast as you can imagine. And pretty soon I lost my breath, and then on the way down I'd black out, and by the time I figured out what happened, oh, he'd start again. And it went on and 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 on until I thought, he isn't gonna stop until I holler. So I gathered what scattered senses I had. And I said with as much dignity as I could muster, sir, I believe I've had enough for a while. And he said, okay then, if you've had enough, we'll stop. I've been busy for 2 days, but I wouldn't have missed it for the world. And then later, she wrote, I went on a low-level bombing pod today. Our wings were almost touching the water. Imagine being that close over enemy guns. It's all in the element of surprise. Hedge hopping between trees as fast as you can imagine. And then right over the target and bombs away out of there faster than you came. And then in the early summer of 1945, she wrote, the hottest place under the sun is in the radio compartment of an F-4U. Oh, I'm glad I'm short, but I wish I wasn't quite so fat, because my arms and legs get tangled up in there, and invariably a strong-armed Marine has to pull me out by the feet. What would they do if I died in here? Would they dissect the plane? I don't think so. They'd probably dissect me. Or they might take me to Tokyo with them. Of course, they might do that anyway. Did I tell you that I'm on the overseas list now? That shocked me when I read it. Because I'd never heard anything about women in combat in World War II. But I have a cousin in the Air Force, and he said that they'd have put him in the back seat of the fighter plane to do the radio and the radar. I don't know, Eric, you might know that, but
I've never heard that.
It's handwritten in a letter, and I'm sure. Well, my mom saved her sister's letters, but not her own. And so I was sitting there. Oh, I treasure the time, and I hope you'll do it if you have military people in your family. I treasure the time when I went over those letters with her. But she hadn't saved her own, and I said again, Mom, please, tell me about being a woman during World War II. And she said, by then, well, maybe I could tell you something. She said, I was trained in the VA hospital in Hot Spring, Arkansas. And one thing that sticks out to me is that Helen Keller visited every man in our hospital who had lost his sight or his hearing. Do you know who Helen Keller was? Well, your teachers are going to have to tell you. Mom said, she really inspired me. I always tried to find work to do near her so that I could see her face and hear her interpret it. She was such an inspiration. But she said the men inspired her. I know they inspired me. After that, my mom was transferred to Cushing General Hospital in Framingham, Massachusetts, and put on a burn unit. She said that the worst suffering she ever saw was with burn patients. And if you're able to come back tomorrow, the next day, I'll tell you some of those stories. But there's one I want to end with, especially because of this young gentleman that we have sitting over here. And I have to let my mom set the scene for you before I get into the story about the German war. But it goes like this. The Queen Mary, the Queen Elizabeth, and the Ile-de-France all docked in the Boston Harbor on the very same day, each carrying 7,000 casualties. We put half again as many beds in every ward. We cleared out our barracks and put the ambulatory patients in there. We furloughed every man who could get care for a month somewhere else. Discharged a lot of them, and there were still 2,000 men on one of the ships for several weeks until we could make room. And this happened in every private hospital and every army or every military-based hospital in the entire Boston area. They put us on 12 to 14-hour-a-day shifts, 7 days a week, and we did that until the end of the war. It was a hectic time. And while this was going on, and you never saw this in the newspapers, but I was there. It happened. A German submarine made it almost in to the Boston Harbor. And that sub was manned entirely by teenage boys, age 14 to 17 years old. The only mature man on that sub was the captain. And those boys, on their own steam, made it almost onto our shore. Well, they had drunk so much seawater and so much diesel fuel that when they were being transported to a hospital through Boston, they didn't see anything. Boy, oh boy, when they started to feel better, whoo, were they ever brainwashed. They absolutely were sure that New York City and Boston had been flattened, and that the Germans were occupying most of the United States, if not all. Of course, it didn't stop them from making eyes at us or trying to escape. Well, somehow they figured out that there was another prisoner of war ship in our hospital. And there was. We had a German merchant marine ship with wounded there in the hospital. And we had to have a locked fence all between those two groups of German prisoners, with MPs stationed all the way along. Because those boys were trying to kill the merchant marines, and they were trained because they thought the Marines had committed treason. Well, I wasn't in combat or anything, but I guess I did my share of defense work. Well, when I think about my mom and the letters that she saved, I realize that these young women probably could have run a cattle ranch by themselves. Instead, they chose to do their share of defense work. Thank you all for coming. And come back tomorrow or the next day when I can tell you the rest of the story. Do you have any questions?
Why did you come over here for some reason?
Why did I come over here for some reason?
Yeah.
I guess I like these were feisty young women, and I'm glad you came over here for some reason too. Do any of you have women military in your family? Men? Yeah. Who were they and where did they serve?
Well, my brother-in-law was a chaplain.
Yes. Yes. What a needed and wonderful thing to do.
Yes.
And they go right into dangerous situations too.
Sergeant, United States Marine.
Yes. That's a hard place to be. Who else had somebody?
My dad was Navy, and my grandfather, he was in the Army, and then our son's in the Army.
Oh,
Retired Navy.
that's impressive.
Retired Navy.
And I know that this gentleman over here had 12 great uncles.
Yeah, one of them was killed on D-Day.
Now, I thought that I had the same amount of time for this group that I had for the others.
20 minutes. We're at 18:30.
Okay. So
So,
if you have any more questions, we have.
just
we
real
have a
quick,
couple of minutes.
Ruth, if you could tell us, the second sister next to you, yeah, what's that uniform she has and what's the patch?
The nurses' corps.
Nurses Corps. Okay, because
Yes.
I don't recognize the patch, so,
Yeah, she was a nurse, and she was trained by the Nurses Corps in Denver, and she was a nurse for the rest of her life.
I see.
In fact, she was the head nurse at the Laramie Hospital for many, many years. My Aunt Dorothy was trained as a pilot by the Navy, Aunt Florence, and she was a high school teacher and a crop duster for the rest of her life. Aunt Dorothy owned a cattle ranch with her husband, and they did that all of their lives in Colorado. And my mom was a teacher, and she'd been a teacher before the war, except she'd been in a one-room school in Colorado, and after the war she had the GI Bill, and so she was able to get a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and taught me. We were in a very remote area, and so even though we weren't exactly homeschooled, she really taught me to read, and I learned to love reading, and the GI Bill helped her with a lot of those skills.
Ruth, are any of them alive today?
All of these have passed.
Yeah.
But there were 2 preschoolers. I think my grandparents were hoping to have some boys. And there were 2 preschoolers when these enlisted. And my Aunt Marge and my Aunt Wilma are still alive. But Marge is only 9 years older than I am.
I know how proud they must be of you.
This isn't really my story, it's my mom and my aunt's story, but it's been an honor to be able to tell it to people and share it, and I'm so glad that those letters didn't get put in with junk, you know, when...
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank
God bless you.
you.
Thank you, Ruth.
You're awesome.